I think at my level, working as a subcontractor into head contractors or directly for land developers, it's much more about relationship, and you're much more likely to get better outcomes with honey rather than vinegar.
You're bang on. I mean, those relationships are key. David Griffith, welcome to the Entrepreneurial Engineer podcast. Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, look, thanks for having me down. I really appreciate the opportunity to give myself a bit of time to reflect on things and talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I mean, that's what it's all about, reflecting, talking about your journey, where you're going, what you're doing. But what I really want to know, like, you woke up this morning, what's your current mission? What mission are you on right now?
It's a good question. And I have three different missions I talk about all the time to my people. And the first overriding one, which I keep saying is a little bit of a airy-fairy wank, is I want to change the world through landscaping. And that sounds so broad, but that's what I wake up and want to do every morning. But the way I do that is one relationship at a time. So I think about today, who am I going to affect in my day to make them have a better day? And whether it's staff, customers, other, even suppliers are really important in that. You just got to find a way to affect someone's life in a positive way. And my son often says, Dad, you're talking about the butterfly effect and you're going to change the world. I said, no, it's not the butterfly effect. It's just small things you can do to really affect the greater good. That's what gets me out of bed every morning. Yeah.
I love that. There's so many analogies about 1% every day. You've got talking to, people, making their days better. Why landscaping? Why did you go down that path?
That is a great question. So I had a high school sweetheart when I was in year 12. The week before my HSC, she gave birth to our daughter, Liara. So that was a pretty big moment in my life. My uncle ran a landscape business called Griffith Landscapes. They were the biggest commercial landscaper in Sydney at the time. And I needed a job really badly. So my first day out of school was digging trenches for him. And that sort of is where it all started. I did a landscape apprenticeship with him. And then sort of towards the end of that, I really wanted to do more. And we're working on a Blue Hills wetland project, which was the first big lake in Glenmore Park.
Yeah.
The environmental project with one number of creeks running into it. And there was an environmental component to that. So it's really the first VMP that I think had been done in the western suburbs of Sydney at the time. So a vegetation management plan. So I got sucked into the environmental side, and I went to uni and studied environmental science for 2 years. But I couldn't really afford to keep a family going, study and work part-time. So I gave up that and went back working full-time in landscaping. And that's sort of where landscaping started. I then moved into, it's funny, the company I was working for at the time went bankrupt, and Burton Contractors, I was working, we were subcontracting to them. And they said, oh, look, we're looking for good engineers. And I said, I'm not an engineer. And they said, don't worry, you've got aptitude, just come and work for us, start as a sidey and work up the ladder. So I went engineering for about 7 years. And then I got a little bit, I guess, disengaged with the hours, the lifestyle. I ended up as SPA on the Pacific Highway project. Was a really fundamental point of my life because I was doing 60 to 70 hours a week with no qualifications, which I really felt like an imposter because it wasn't imposter syndrome. I was an imposter. So I went, I need to do something different and go back to what I know, which was landscaping. So came back to Sydney and worked in a different business for 4 or 5 years and built that into quite a successful company, became a shareholder, and then decided to go my own way and start my own thing a few years ago.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, imposter engineer. Like you were just moonlighting. And then, ultimately, and, the podcast really is about entrepreneurship just as much as engineering. So how did you embrace that entrepreneurial mindset? What made you just take that leap? Was it that you sort of grew someone else's business and you thought, you know what, I'm just going to do this myself? How did you take that leap of faith?
It's a really good question. So I knew that I had the ability because I'd grown their business, but it's still a very fearful thing to put all your eggs in one basket and bet on yourself and take a step forward. And the reason I did that was because I actually believed that I had a better way of doing it and I could change things if I took the leap. And that is the critical thing. You've got to believe that you have a better way than what you currently see in the market. And for 20 years in construction, there's this really argumentative way of dealing with things. Everyone's trying to rip people off. I've done it for 20 years. Everyone's kind of trying to get something from somebody, and I want to do it differently and sort of give everyone this really nice. I say it, I don't always act that way. Like, it's still construction. I often find myself going, you've got to calm down a little bit. But really, I want to be able to give the world something which is different to the norm. That's what made me take the leap.
Well, wow. I mean, there's just so many thoughts going through my mind. I mean, one of them really directly, and, you're a nice guy, everyone can tell. Do you have to, in construction, I mean, you talked about construction, and I think construction's got a bad rap over the years. And, how do you feel in construction? Do you think a nice guy can win? Do you think that there is that sort of undertone of, niceness and looking after everyone? Do you feel that undercurrent coming through, or do you think it's still just cutthroat margin, get the job done, in and out?
I think it depends what level you're at. And when I see my clients, so developers, builders, and dealing with their clients, they have a very much aggressive, it's all about the contract and making sure that their contract conditions are met. I think at my level, working as a subcontractor into head contractors or directly for land developers, it's much more about relationship, and you're much more likely to get better outcomes with honey rather than vinegar. And that's what I think the industry changed in the last 5 years, particularly during COVID. But having a conversation the other day, one of my best contacts at the moment I made, because during COVID, I was running someone else's business. We're trying to get staff out of Bankstown. Bankstown area was locked down. I was in tears in front of this guy because I just was so overwhelmed with managing 50 people on COVID. And he's become one of my really close allies in the space where I'm trying to grow my business. You've had a really good connection based on emotion. And I think that's, if you can find them in your, your plethora of people, the ones that you have a really good emotional connection with, that's how you can sort of get away from yelling and screaming and pulling out contracts.
Yeah, it's, having dealt with expert determination and disputes and, contracts over the years. I mean, the best place for the contract, is in the top drawer. But you bang on. I mean, those relationships are key. You mentioned, you had kids really early. Telling me 3 kids, young family. How did that shape your journey as an entrepreneur?
It really gave me focus. So when I talk about, wanting to change the world, both my sons, who are now 21 and 19, they both work for me in the business.
Wow. Yeah, cool.
So one of them studying civil engineering at uni. So he's going to UWS in his first year, and works for me 3 or 4 days a week, depending on his uni load. My other son's a first year landscape apprentice. So having them and wanting them to get the best of the industry has driven my desire to really, have a nice place to work. So that's what that fundamentally has affected me. Having said that, I always talk about the 3 kids and my daughter, who's now 26. It's really, I've always wanted to provide a goal for them to say anything's possible. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are in life. And that's driven my entrepreneurial journey as well, because it's easy to work for someone else and you can do great things working for other people, but to really take a leap and invest in yourself and sort of trust yourself and take that fateful step, I think it's a great example for your kids. And I always wanted to do it. The reality was, when they were younger, I still had to feed them. And I still had to send them to school. It's like, that's what held me back for 20 years, to be honest. So I'm 44. I've had a business since I was 41. Everything up to 41 was, I can't really afford to take the leap because I've got 3 kids I need to feed. When my youngest hit 12, I went, that's time. I can do it now. Now's the time.
Because exactly what you just said, that drive, just how do you, and there's a lot of people I'm sure listening that don't have kids, right? So, and I see it a lot where you just go, the drive, how do you think you package up that drive to someone that doesn't have kids, who maybe doesn't understand what that really means? Because I think, I've got kids, and I feel like there is part of that, but that essence and trying to figure that out. I mean, that to me, if we could unpack that, that
Yeah.
I think would really give
I don't think you
people a
need
really
to
good
have
idea.
kids to have, you don't need to have children to have drive. You need to
Yeah.
have what children do is they give you a reason. So if you can find a reason, and as I said, my reason is to, make the world a better place by looking after one person at a time. That's not because I have children. That's because I want to be a good person in the world. And I guess it's partly my ego. I want
Yeah.
them to see me as a good person. I will be known as a good person. So
Yeah.
it's using my ego to some degree to sort of drive my behavior. And that behavior is working 12-hour days, 7 days a week sometimes, and loving it because I want to do the right thing. And actually, now I'm talking about it, it boils down to ego. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've got to fuel it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I always say that, if you love your work, it's not really work at all, because you get up, you're motivated. Monday mornings are great. You're ready to crack into it. You want to push through and actually make an impact. So, I read in some information you sent over, earlier on in your career that you went to work in Darwin. Can you unpack that and what sort of impact that made on your career? And
Absolutely. So I
yeah,
was,
that sounds amazing. Like I love it up there. I really love to hear the story.
we loved it. And so we were living in Western Sydney in Rouse Hill. We were in our late 20s, sort of struggling financially. I was working as an SPE for Burdens. My wife was working in childcare. Our lives sort of drifted because she was working funny hours. I was working funny hours, 3 kids. And we hit a realization, we're like, is this it? Is this what life is? So I applied for a job with B&D. I said, don't worry, I won't get it. It's okay. And then a week later, the guys from B&D flew down to meet me. And a week after that, I was on a plane to Darwin. It was such an exciting thing to do. And it gave me, I guess, the knowledge that you can take a leap whenever you want. Doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Doesn't matter how secure you think you should be or, how locked into life you are. If you go, I'm going to do something different, you can take the leap. And as long as you've got the drive and the people around you. So I guess to just take a sidestep, my wife and my 3 kids, if we hadn't done that, I don't think we'd be the people we are today because it allowed us to become so close. I mean, we had no choice. The 5 of us flew 4,000 kilometers away and planted ourselves in the middle of a pretty hot place and tried to, get used to the environment. It's pretty culturally different up there as well for young kids. So it was such a great experience. And it really, from there, gave me the knowledge, as I said, to know that you can do anything you want, really. And it doesn't matter how crazy your dream is if you take a step, as you can, and you have the drive, you can achieve whatever you want from that step. But Darwin's an amazing place to live. There's so much opportunity, I guess, is the first thing, because there's not many, there's not many people there for a very long period of time. So there's lots of comings and goings, opportunity to meet people, opportunities to take roles that you may not be qualified for, but they allow you to step into and grow into, which is pretty cool. And that definitely grew my career. I did some pretty crazy things up there. Like we did work down at Tyndall in the RAF base. We did lots of work out in the communities, but also working in really extreme environments. Obviously, the wet season and the dry season are totally different. Trying to manage construction programs and budgets and forecasts when it's raining for 9 days straight becomes pretty strenuous. But then you transfer that, I guess, knowledge you built back to the East Coast where they're much faster paced, but you don't have the same limitations. It really allowed me to flourish in my career.
Yeah. Did it change you as a person?
My initial thought was 100%, but I don't know if it changed me as a person. It allowed me to see the world differently.
Yeah.
And I really feel, and I guess a little bit of a side note is my understanding of, I guess, humanity in Australia changed drastically because I think, and this is speaking about Indigenous stuff, on the East Coast, growing up in Sydney, we don't see much Indigenous. We just get fed bits and pieces, but you move to Darwin and to northern parts of Australia, and you really see, and I really felt, the history of stolen generation and all the things that we don't hear about on the East Coast that are really important to a large percentage of Indigenous population. That's what I took away from Darwin, actually, is that really strong feeling that there's more to the story about Indigenous health and welfare than we know as white Australians. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine it's eye-opening.
Well, I mean, there's
having traveled up there, you're right, it's something else.
yeah, I mean, what was interesting, so we drove down to a place called Gregory Creek, which is on the WA Victoria, the Victoria River, which is the WA border.
Yeah.
That's called the Gregory Tree, and there's Gregory National Park. It's the site of the Wave Hill Walk-Off. And in 1964, there were people being paid in sugar, flour, and tea. So like Indigenous population being paid in sugar, flour, and tea in 1964, which to me was mind-blowing. Like my parents were in Australia, they immigrated from England to Australia. They were, you know, so
yeah, it was 5 minutes ago.
Living essentially as slaves, paid slaves in our country, and we don't talk about that on the East Coast very much. Yeah.
Yeah, it's disgusting. It makes you sick.
Yeah.
When you came back, did you feel a bit of reverse culture shock, or was it like a moment of going, oh, like all of a sudden now I've got to sort of re-assimilate, so to speak?
That was actually a huge moment. So we used to come back every Christmas. I remember the first Christmas we came back, like everything seemed a bit sped up because Darwin's very laid back. I remember when I came back full-time for the East Coast, I actually spent about 3 months kind of shell-shocked because I moved from Darwin where, to be honest, I was dropping the kids to school at 7:30 in the morning. I'd pick them up at 3:30 in the afternoon. I'd go back to the office for a couple of hours, but like really life was pretty cruisy. And I came back to work on the Pacific Highway Complete project where I had to be in the office at 6:30 in the morning. I had 7 engineers under me. I'd work till about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. That was 5 days a week, sometimes a Saturday. Sometimes we did, asphalt sheeting at midnight on a Friday night. So I was working, I said, between 50 and 70 hours a week. That was a culture shock, like a really big one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, having worked a lot of long hours, as a young engineer, like I get it. And yeah, the reason why I asked the question is because it's like it's more than a new normal. It's out of control normal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, tell me about Earthbuild Environmental. I love to hear about some of the projects you're on. What's your biggest challenge right now in the industry?
It's a good question. I think the biggest challenge at the moment is getting people to understand that there's value beyond bottom dollar. And everyone says the same thing, but it seems like everyone's in this race to the bottom. And it's really about, rather than trying to find the cheapest price, it's about finding the best methodology. So what's the most efficient way of doing something, which will then become the best price, as opposed to saying, just give me a better rate. That I think is the challenge in the industry. Earthbuild overall, I'm really excited by it. So we do two things. We do environmental consulting. We've got ecologists out there writing VMP, so vegetation management plans, doing biological assessments, writing dam dewatering plans, doing pre-strip clearing surveys for engineering companies. And that's a big part of the business. The other part is landscape construction, commercial only. And we've got clients such as Stocklands, Lend-Lease. And to be honest, working for companies like that after 2.5 years in business is actually really exciting. I couldn't have imagined it when me, my son, and an old friend of mine were on the shovel 2.5 years ago digging trees at Wiseman's Ferry. I didn't realize in 2.5 years there'd be 26 people and,
wow,
millions in turnover. And the challenge, aside from the industry challenge, the challenge with that is, as much as I want to have a certain culture in the business where I, changing the world through landscaping, being kind, being honest are the things I try and drive, getting 26 people on that same journey is the most complex part because everyone's different and everyone's trying to do their own thing in life. They've got their own things going on. And it's really easy to just say, just follow my example. But it's not good enough to say, follow my example, because everyone's got their own stresses and their own preconceptions that they come with. So I'm really trying to drive this focus of being kind, being honest. And in essence, if you do those things, you're going to be awesome. And that's that's the culture I'm trying to feed through the business. That is the challenge, getting culture right. Because I think if we get the culture right from those two fundamental things of being kind and being honest, customers are going to love us, employees are going to love working for Earthbuild, and by proxy, we're just going to grow because we're good. And that's the challenge, getting the culture right.
I was going to ask you. I had a question here about whether or not you're a consultant or a contractor. And you answered the question because I guess it would be pretty easy to say, 50-50, but is there one that you would lean more towards, or do you think that having the combined offering gives you more leverage?
combined offering definitely gives more leverage. It allows us to have, firstly, a better understanding of the overall project. So when we're pricing construction work, we already understand the consulting work that's come before it. And when we're pricing consultancy work or delivering consultancy work, we know what the construction work is going to be coming afterwards. So we can sort of balance them out. And it's actually given us a lot of benefit by being able to provide upfront market-leading strategies and really good ways of implementing cost benefit to a project without having to get third parties involved. So Lend-Lease and Stocklands in particular have benefited from that.
Yeah, you know, I was actually saying a few months ago that there's, you know, the D&C space, and when I say D&C, I mean almost like from zero to build, completion, handover.
Yep.
It was big, you know, 10, 15 years ago when I was a young engineer, and there was a lot of that. And then it sort of moved to this construct only model. Then we went back to delivery partners, and you got early contractor involvement, and there's a lot of different methodologies out there. And in the built form space, I feel like there is that sort of get it to 70%, and then you sort of let the contractor take it over. But in land subdivision and landscaping, and I'll put it out there for free, I mean, that is the future. If you can create value early in the piece and then deliver on that, I mean, it's a no-brainer for a client who's paying the bills.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that is fundamental to, yeah, as you said, the future. The future is allowing people who are experts in their field to do the work they can without having to involve everybody else. I mean, and I see it, I really think post-COVID, where all these designs were rushed through, because everyone wanted to get money from whatever grants were coming through. Designs are rushed through, and lots of projects we're involved with now are held up because the design was only taken to 55 or 60%. It was then given to contractors to build or developers to go and get through the DA process. And it's really slowed up construction on site. And I think it's one of the problems in the industry generally with the slowdown at the moment is that design wasn't finalised 3 or 4 years ago. That's something I'm seeing a lot of.
Tell me, you mentioned the word slowdown, and, I mean, I've spoken to other guests about housing prices and market conditions, industry. You mentioned slowdown. Tell me a bit about that. What is that meaning to you right now?
What that means to me is we have contracts on our books that we can't get on site for because various things are holding up our customers from getting their work done. A good example is, stormwater wasn't designed properly in southwest Sydney, so there's no sewage treatment plant. The stormwater isn't going anywhere, so there's basins being held up. Like those sorts of things, the fundamental, I guess, underlying factors that drive development in some council areas aren't there. So they can't even get their designs finished for us to come in afterwards.
How important for you is that underlying engineering layer? I imagine in my mind, I'm an engineer and I'm like, oh yeah, we'll just do the engineering and stick the landscaping on top, happy days.
It's actually critical. And the thing is, it's critical to know what the landscape needs to look like above it. There's a great example. I worked on the Hume Highway back in 2007 for Leighton's.
Mm-hmm.
And Tract was the designer. And there was 70 kilometres of highway. We did pockets of planting. Out of the 70 k's, we probably missed about 10 k's. So 60 kilometres of landscape revegetation on both sides in the middle of the road. The landscape design in the middle of the road called for plants to within a metre of the pavement, and then boxed out 300 mil deep with soil, drainage in the bottom, and the plants were going to flourish. What happened with the engineering design was no one cross-referenced engineering to landscape, and their road base ran out 3.5 metres from edge of pavement into the middle. So effectively, it was a 7 metre verge of road base that we were supposed to put plants into. At the time, they said, just do it. And I said, it's all going to die. I said, just do it anyway. And, 20 years later, it's all dead because we were told to put plants in the road base. Things have changed a lot since then, but it's really important to understand, particularly with drainage, like what drainage is going to be in your engineering design to feed landscape. And with street trees in particular, they need good drainage. You can't just stick them in a clay hole. They'll die, trees will die. And also with garden beds, just knowing if they're going to get water with irrigation, where's that water running to? Is it going into stormwater? So those sorts of things matter.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Oh, those engineers. I mean, come on.
No, it's not like those engineers.
I'm joking around.
Well, I know you are, but it's the same time. Like I say it all the time, it's just fucking let us do landscaping.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things. I guess that's one of the beauties of having sort of been in both camps. I can see both sides. I know that engineering details are there because that's the design that needs to be followed for it to have a 50-year lifespan if required. But I also know that the green infrastructure space, particularly with all the funding going into it at the moment from government, is really important. In fact, it's a critical part of humanity, really, is to have that green space around us, particularly as we fill in what is currently greenfields and brownfields into big higher subdivisions and high density living. We need that green space as much as we can.
Yeah,
so landscaping. I'm so passionate about landscaping for that exact reason. I bloody love the idea of putting green spaces into people's lives.
Oh, I mean, no doubt. Big advocate for, canopy cover and, blue green and, seeing a lot of stuff with WSUD. And I think, you mentioned before about the challenges within, your business. Tell me about what you're seeing with some challenges in general in the industry. I mean, you talked about maybe approvals or, other infrastructure holding you up. What's the general scene looking like in terms of that? That landscaping industry, or at least in where you're playing. What's happening in that space? Because it's quite interesting.
Yeah, look, the space I'm playing in. So typically it's land subdivision. I do a little bit of work with builders in high rise. So we do some work for builders in the city around Bellevue Hill and Chatswood. Typically land subdivisions sort of all over northwest and southwest Sydney. The main thing driving us at the moment, which is the big talking point, is funding for smaller developments is drying up. And so that's affected our market share, our customers' market share. And that really is, I think, going to be the big story of the next 12 to 18 months. As government says we want to build 1.2 million homes by 2030, whatever they're saying. Mm-hmm. How are they going to do that when the land value is no longer possible for a small developer to come and make any money out of? The big guys, are, in my opinion, are going to be fine. They're using their own money, their own funding to push things through. But I'm just not sure how the industry gets through that cycle of, really expensive land, very little return or very little yield on their developments, and how that translates to a burgeoning market. Because there's plenty of landscape going on around, and government's putting a lot of money into broad open space, but it's more about the small developer market. That's what I think is the big story at the moment.
I'd love it if we had a bit of a reframe on that. We talk about 1.2 million homes. Why aren't we saying, 4.4 million trees?
Yeah.
Front yard, backyard. Why aren't we saying the government is going to fund, 6 million trees being planted? Because in being in development and, obviously working with DCPs and canopy cover targets and a lot of the controls that you need to, that would be amazing if not only, yes, we talk about housing, but if we talked about trees, because seeing Western Sydney heat up, seeing that for what it is, if we don't invest in the green infrastructure, our cities and communities are just going to be boiling point, particularly with temperatures increasing year on year.
Yeah, and I think there's been some push towards that, but the reality is that funding from council, so it may be in a subdivision that every house needs a tree, or there's a WSUD system installed which is supposed to filter stormwater really well when it's designed. But the reality is that tree generally dies during the maintenance period because it gets run over by a builder building a house, and no one's told to fix it. Or the WSUD, as much as they try and program around it so that there's 80% build before they do the final layout in WSUD, they're always filled with rubbish and they don't do their job properly. And that to me is the fundamental, providing more funding to council so they can actually manage their green infrastructure better. That's where I see a real gap in that, I guess, the environmental space moving forward.
Do you feel like, and it might be a bit pointed because I see other states, moving on from the standards that we have here in New South Wales, particularly around water quality. Yeah. Do you have a view on that? Because that's a fundamental, in my mind, specific standard or control. Are you seeing that, or even saying that perhaps we're missing the mark? Do you feel that? Because I do a little bit, and I wanted to get particularly on maybe water quality or something else that's in your day-to-day. You mentioned bioretention.
Yeah, so we do bioretention, then that feeds into a lot of the VMP. So the creek lines that bioretention feeds into, we do a lot of the maintenance, 3 to 5 year maintenance contracts in those creeks.
Yep.
A lot of stuff flowing out of it. And I think that WSUDs, as I said, they're not being correctly maintained, and that's allowing pollutants to get into the systems and then into the river system. So that is definitely an issue. And as I said, it really comes down to council funding, because councils, I don't believe they have enough money to do it. It needs to be probably a national approach. You said other states have gone in other ways. I know that Queensland have changed their planning structure recently, and they've sort of a much more robust way of dealing with the water exiting their WSUD systems.
Yeah,
we follow that, and I guess that's because they've got more water, essentially. You know, they get higher rainfall. But we need to follow those examples and really, I guess, put a note on the requirement for clean outflows from development into rivers and eventually the ocean. Yeah.
Have you heard of the acronym NORBE?
No.
Oh, it's basically neutral or beneficial. It's a state environmental planning policy in Western Sydney, and instead of having the your typical music model outputs with your phosphorus and nitrogen target, basically it says it should be neutral or beneficial as it was pre-development.
Right.
And I have going through that and whatnot. It's one of those things, and I think even as an engineer or a developer client, landscaper, whatnot, council, to spend all of that time, effort, and energy modeling and strategizing and designing, and then to hear that well, it doesn't get maintained, and all that work you did just gets flushed down the river. I mean, that in itself, it hurts. And we all have the same targets in mind.
Yeah, that's absolutely the reality. I mean, you can walk around doesn't matter how old they are. I live in northwest Sydney, in an older suburb, and you walk around the outskirts here, and the WSUD that was built 15, 20 years ago is just full of rubbish. There's weeds in it, and it's all just overtopping and flowing straight into the bushland below it. So that in itself is a problem. The new ones, they'll be the same because there's no funding for it.
Yeah.
And you're right.
I hope someone's listening that might actually be able to take a leadership role on this, because you just spend money after money after money to do something that's you would think, at least you'd hope, gold plated, but you're right.
All the modeling they do in the background, which is fantastic and makes perfect sense.
Yeah, run your models,
do
your computer programs, do your AutoCAD and design this and that. But at the end of the day, it might look good for the first year or two, but it is disappointing, to think that that those things would just be a waste. So
yes, yeah, absolutely.
36% of listeners won't subscribe to this podcast, and that's a real shame. If you want to help me share the stories and help others learn and grow, then please like and subscribe.
Yeah. So, how important, and I heard your mission statement, and I love that. Sustainability, in everything you do, not just in the work you do, but the business. Tell me about how sustainability impacts, your working life cycle, your project life cycle. How important is that to you, and how do you implement that?
It's a really good question, and it's fun. We call it Earthbound Environmental. I want to be an environmental business, and I'm always striving to find ways to be sustainable. So one of the early things I said was I want to use all electric equipment. I want to, example, electric utes. The reality of it was the technology isn't there yet to support that dream. So when I talk about using electric equipment, the batteries required to support everything being electric, you've got to have them on charge, continually rotating them through. So you've got to sort of counterbalance what you want to be as sustainable with what the current situation is in terms of technology. Having said that, with sustainability in mind, we really focused on lots of recycling. So everything we do, we think about, is it going to landfill? Are we recycling the waste? The industry actually is pretty good at doing that as well. I think, the last 20 years, all the big players in material supply, they're all using recycled products. And that's been a big thing that we can, as a business, we can go and find the most sustainable products for our projects and put them in it, which is great. But also little things like, this crazy things, turning the lights out, making sure that we're actually thinking about our electricity usage in our own power bills, both at home and in the office. We have everything's on green power, so we've had a little bit of extra to make sure we green power. And I think those things, if you can take those fundamentals into your life, from your life into your business, they're great. But also the sustainability from a different perspective, which is sustainable work output for my employees. And that's probably a different take on sustainability than you're talking about. But what I try and do is make sure that I don't push everybody every day to do everything. Lots of my guys, we have construction sites that are 7 till 3 or 7 till 3:30. I never ask them what time they're starting and what time they're finishing. I don't mind if someone gets to work at 8:30. If they've got two guys that are starting early and they've got someone else starting at a different time, as long as they're achieving their outcomes in that workday or in the project life cycle that makes our customer happy, that's the real driver that I'm looking for. And I think that's another thing about sustainability, aside from just environmental sustainability, but like lifestyle sustainability for employees. Because that's going to drive their own ability to be sustainable in their lives. They think about recycling, think about how they can be more efficient in things. Because the more time you have to reflect on stuff where you're not just working flat out, that to me is sort of delivering better sustainability for everybody, both for an environmental and also from a social perspective.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're bang on. I haven't seen the electric excavator yet. I've seen pictures of graders that might be electric and other bits and bobs. Haven't really seen those rolled out. I've seen some electric vehicles, funnily enough, from gas companies.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I don't think the lithium's quite there yet.
No,
unfortunately.
The power output from lithium batteries isn't there.
Yeah, that's right.
Even leafing, so like backpack blowers that everyone uses for maintenance, a backpack blower takes 4 batteries. The battery's worth $600 each, and the batteries last 45 minutes. So if you want to really blow your money, you go spend $2,000 on batteries to do 45 minutes worth of work. And so you've got to have $4,000 worth of batteries to be able to work continually and also be able to plug them into a charger at any one time. So that's, for an excavator, it's even worse.
Yeah, you just turn on the diesel generator to charge the batteries. That'd be fine.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So I mean, it's super interesting. Tell me, because it is. I mean, the whole idea of the podcast is about entrepreneurs, about how you got to where you are. What's the one thing, if you look back and, I know we talked about Darwin, so you can't use that.
No, wow. Yeah.
I know. But if you had to look back and just say there was one moment, one impact, what someone said to me, was there just something that you went, aha, and that was, maybe where you launched into, where you are today?
Yeah. So what really allowed me to think beyond my sphere of reality was being taken on. So I was just a landscaper. The company I worked for went bankrupt. Was taken on by a civil engineering company who said, don't worry, you can just have aptitude and from there you'll be fine. I went and put me on this really complex project called Castle Ray Dam. So all the Penrith Lake system, it was the first dam that got put into Penrith Lakes. It's the main dam between the lakes and the Nepean River. Without any qualification, I was put in as the site engineer, moved up to project engineer, then moved up to SPE. And I went through this process of building this super complex structure. And what I used in hindsight was my personal skills. So, dealing with subbies, dealing with, other employees, dealing with site guys that did sort of wanted its job done, also wanted to go home, and dealing with suppliers. And it was 4,500 cubes of concrete, which is so big for me. Achieving that and working on that and then getting accolades from Burton saying you did an amazing job. That was when I went, you know what, I can do this for myself. Because I really felt like, as much as you're working in a business, I felt that I had by the bootstraps, pulled something together without much prior experience and really delivered what I thought was an amazing project. And it's a bit of an ego thing to say I did it myself, but I really felt like I pulled everyone together on that job.
You poured all those cubes of concrete yourself.
No, I didn't, but I was able to get people to do it.
You're on the jemmy and the shovel.
Yeah, but I got people there at 4 a.m. under spotlights with concrete coming from Boral, and they were broken down trucks and bloody pumps that broke down and foremen that were yelling and engineers that didn't want to sign off ITPs, and I pulled it all together. And that was like anything's possible at this point. And that was really a defining moment, yeah. The final job was it. That was, I went, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Do you believe it was your ability to work on those relationships that you had? Was it just people, or do you think that there was the drive that you talked about before? I mean, most people would just go into that situation and be like, "Rah," like, or have layers and layers. But what was the one thing you think, or a couple of things do you think that got you through that?
One thing's definitely the ability to take people as they are and help them to where you want them to get to. So, and I guess a big thing with that is the relationship between engineers and site teams is sometimes quite fractured, because site teams have a certain driver, engineering teams have a certain driver. So I think coming into that role, I really tried to take on the site delivery team's ideas and then let them know that the engineering side has to get done too. The ITPs have to get signed off. We have to make programs that are kind of unreasonable, and you guys have to do it with a smile on your face. And I took that as one facet of being able to deliver that. And the other side was working with the client to really understand what their drivers were, about program, but also about safety. So Boral was the head contractor, the owner of the site there. They were super critical about safety. Everything at the time in 2011 seemed way over the top of the norms now is super safety. You're just sort of taking that on board, and I guess it was the personal side down talking about it further that really allowed me to flourish in that situation. Emotional intelligence is often talked about now as like a great thing, but it actually is. If you can have emotional intelligence and understand where someone's coming from as they are right then, that allows you to drive and push through problems.
The translator.
Yes, absolutely.
Definitely between the engineering and site teams, because, even me, working on sites as a young engineer, even digging holes and whatnot, if you can get that respect and translate the answers, or at least where people are coming from, I mean, that's powerful. And I could see why, you did so well, even on the Tremie, as you said. I mean, amazing work.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what's the future? What do you think the future is for maybe just in the first instance, like your business, like maybe let's hear about your hopes, aspiration, dreams, goals. What is that looking like? Maybe for the industry, maybe for tech. What can you see? What's your vision? And then how do you think the industry is going, or what's your take on the future in terms of tech or innovation?
Yeah, for sure. So for my business at the moment, I want to become, I guess we're so infant, I want to become more sustainable. I want to be able to get to a turnover. I don't like to throw dollar figures out, but let's say 20 million per annum for 5 years. We're currently sitting sort of a bit under half that at the moment. So I said 20 million for 5 years, and then ideally, and this is like the pipe dream, is 50 million by 2040. That's the number I've got at the moment. Having said that, it comes with a couple of different caveats. One is I want it to be based on good work for good people. So that's one of the driving philosophies I try and follow. And also, I don't want to grow for the sake of growth. I want to grow because we're doing really, really good work in the environmental space that's making a difference in the world. So that's I guess the key driver of where I want my business to go. For the industry, I'd really like to see for the whole civil landscape conglomerate, I'd really like it to see a way forward which prices come down for development so that we can actually deliver the required housing for, to be honest, my kids, because I can't see how my 3 kids can buy in Sydney unless I invest in them. And I think that's a really big problem in society. If we can't provide housing for kids that are born in Sydney, that's an issue. I think that as an industry, we need to address that. And we can if we get the right levers from government. I'm just not sure what those levers are. That's a pretty big statement.
It's a big statement. We've only got a little bit of time. I mean, we could be talking for hours on this. What's the impact of tech and innovation where you are doing the work that you do?
For the things that we do, remote sensing is probably the biggest leap forward I'd like to take. So with our VMP work in particular, remote sensing environmental stuff. So how much rainfall's fallen on a certain site, having remote sensors out there looking at that, looking at the amount of nitrogen in the soil seasonally so we can work out When's the right time to fertilize? Is the planting we're going to be putting into these environments, which is kind of hostile with its old farmland, we're putting native plants into old farmland. What's the best time to plant? When's the nitrogen the best? When's the most soil activity? So for microbes, because microbes are needed in the soil, it's those remote sensing things that are they're being used on broad scale farming at the moment. They haven't been brought into horticulture so much. Sort of looking at ways to bring that in. And the other thing is drones and the capacity for drones to really go out and do remote work. So I've seen some examples of it. I haven't seen them widely used, but examples of drones that fly around, and instead of poisoning weeds, which is a environmental problem at the moment, particularly around glyphosate use, etc., they're using lasers to zap weeds whilst flying over them, and it's really fast. There's a video of a drone in the States which is going, and it's covering like 15 hectares in 25 minutes.
Wow.
Just zapping weeds with lasers, which is pretty cool. So that to me is probably the future as well.
Well. I mean, Elon Musk. Every time I see a drone now, I'm gonna be worried. Like, I'm gonna get that.
Oof, absolutely worried about that.
Do you see? And I mean, there's been a bit of news recently about Elon and his Tesla robots.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Because I could foresee that a robot could be digging a hole and putting a plant in the next 10 years.
Which would be fantastic.
Do you think that's going to happen?
I think it is. I mean, based on what I read yesterday about Elon's robot that can take the rubbish out and logs and put the kids to bed or whatever it can do, I can't see why that technology can't be applied to putting a plant in, because if we have design that can be put into it, which they're in CAD already, you get put into a robot, he can do it. And there'll still be a need for human element, because it doesn't matter what part of construction is, humans need to assess it at some point, is my personal opinion.
Yeah.
If we can get the grunt work done by robots, that's cool. That's actually really cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah,
no lasers.
No lasers.
No lasers. But robots,
Robots digging holes, perfect.
You go for it, mate. Just dig a little to the left. I've got it. And pick that tree up while you're at it. Get that.
Yeah.
In the hole.
That then paves the way for this idea of having a global minimum wage. The idea 35, 40 years ago was eventually robots will take over. Humans can sit back doing nothing, be given a wage by the government, $100,000 a year, and all the work's done by robots. We can always sit on the beach all day. So that could drive something as well.
Well, someone's going to have to put the sunscreen on my back, okay? If it's Robo, then so be it,
Yeah.
Mate, so tell me, there's a lot of people listening and, they're obviously, love the story. It's so good to hear about, your formative years, where you've been, what you've done, your future ambitions, some of the stories that just helped you get to where you are. If there was one thing, a phrase, a statement, just some advice you can give to some of the younger listeners out there who might be digging a trench or might be planting a tree or might be thinking, I'm an engineer, but maybe I want to do this, or I'm a landscaper, maybe I want to be an engineer, or whatever it is.
Yep.
Can you give the listeners just a little bit of something that they can, maybe take a little golden nugget away from this chat we've had?
Sure. And I think the best way to talk about that is to think about everything that you fear. And everyone fears change, essentially, is my experience in life. Everyone's most scared of change. If you can embrace change and know that if you take the first step, it's never as scary as you think it's going to be. And the second step is heaps easier than the first step. It's just taking the first step is the best way forward. And it doesn't matter what you want to do. I've had some crazy career twos and fros that we haven't really even spoken about. I went off and became an actor for a while because I just want to go and do that. And I actually made some really good money acting, and then I went, it's not for me because I can't be an actor and have family. So I went.
Is that you on Home and Away?
I have been in a few shows, but not Home and Away. But having said that, it's one of those things, like it's taking that first step, doesn't matter what you want to do.
Yeah.
It's being cognizant enough that once you've taken a step, you can always turn around and take a step back if it's not the right step. That's a big thing. It's easy to take that. It's easy to say take the first step. And then that's fear itself. But there's also a fear of failure, which you should not be afraid of failing, because that to me is the biggest lesson I've learned is You can take steps and it's great. You keep stepping forward and the second step's easier. But as long as you know that if you fail and you can't take the third step, it's okay. You go back to the start, you take a step in a different direction. And that's the fundamentals, I think, of being an entrepreneur. The ability to go, I'm going to do it. Oh, this is not working. I'm going to do something else. And that's a lesson for life as opposed to just entrepreneurship. Like if you can do that in life, that's been my experience anyway. That's allowed me to live what I think is a really fun, great existence so far, just doing stuff that I want to do, working out, hang on, it's not for me, and then going and doing something else until I found the thing that really was for me. And I always knew I was going to be running my own business. I didn't realise how much I would absolutely love running my own business. There's so many benefits to it. I really feel like I'm personally making a big difference in people's lives by doing it. But yeah, it's just taking that first step to make a change and take the step. But then knowing if I fail, I've got to go, I can go somewhere else. I can take another step in another direction. And that applies to decisions I make every day, and not just big decisions, but, little decisions like where am I going to buy products from? Where am I going to go for dinner tonight? Like little things. It's about knowing that I could make a mistake and it's okay.
I really do like that. I think I reflected on the other day about, the pivot, right? Because a lot of people say, I'm doing this, this isn't working. And I'm just like, whoa, just pivot. Yeah. Change directions and go do something totally different, totally random that you didn't even know might even work. But to think that not only do you just take that first step, but hey, you can actually step back. I really like that analogy. And you know what? I'm going to use that. So
yeah, cool.
You mentioned other things, which we hadn't talked about. So, come on, unpack them, David. What are we talking about?
So when I was in my late 20s, I'd sort of gone through the construction cycle and had 3 kids and sort of wanted something different in my life. And I went and saw a play in the city and I was really touched by the play. And I thought, I guess similar to what my vibe now is, I want to change people's lives. And I thought, I'm going to change people's lives by telling stories. So I went and did acting classes for 4 nights a week for like 3 years and various different institutions, never NIDA, like never that level, but ended up getting some pretty good roles. I was on a couple of ABC shows. I became a pretty familiar face on the number of Channel 9 series. And then did a number of plays around Sydney. And I actually made about 35 grand over 18 months from acting, which was good money. And that's by any standard. So, yeah, but one thing with that was what I realised to be a really good actor, A, I need probably more artistic integrity, but B, you've got to give up everything and throw yourself into acting 100%. And there was that real moment of like, well, and this is, I guess, kind of personal, do I give up my life and my family to go and be an actor? Because that kind of felt like there was no middle ground. It was like you have to have one or the other. I'm definitely going to stick with my family, and that's been the right decision. So I sort of threw that aside. And it's really funny because my wife says, now, do you go back to acting? Well, no, I'm done acting. That's been done.
But you're still telling stories.
And that's exactly right. And that's
the important part.
That's the one thing that really about my journey really is me telling stories to people, very similar to this. It sort of allows them to buy into my own personal agendas, my own personal ideas. And that's, again, the thing of being an entrepreneur is being able to, you've got to know your story to sell it. So I can sit in a room and I can talk crap with anybody and tell my story and everyone goes, he's great. Doesn't mean I know anything about anything except they're going to use me because I can sell my story.
How important is your pitch in selling your offering as a business owner?
It's really important. My personal pitch, but also the business pitch is really important. You have to know your pitch. You have to know, I guess, your target audience to some degree.
Yeah.
Like your target audience will come. If you're passionate about your pitch, your target audience doesn't matter who they are. They're going to be attracted to you and want to put you on the journey with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I often talk about sales. Engineering, you can be the most technical engineer on the planet.
Yeah.
But if you can't sell, then you ain't getting paid. And as far as I know, most people want to get paid.
Yes.
You can be have the ideas in the back room, but if you're not selling them, you're not really going anywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. David, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you. And I just, for people who want to get in contact with you, obviously you talked about your company name. I'm sure they can Google that. Is there the best way to get a hold of you, we'll obviously put it in the description. But
Yeah, so
wants to reach out or wants to get some work from you or has worked for you, how would they reach out?
yeah, so there's a number of ways. Obviously, LinkedIn. So David Griffith is my profile on LinkedIn. Our website is earthbuilt, www.earthbuilt.au, so no.com. And that's the two ways to reach me. So once again, thinking about my sales pitch to the market, one thing we've got on our website is me talking to people about coming and working for us. There's another sort of way of interacting with people without having to interact with people. And I get lots of guys coming to me and go, I really want to work for you because I saw your video. So I was trying to think about ways outside the box to attract people to you as well.
I love that. It's such a personal touch. I mean, I'm pretty busy right now, but I'd love to come work for you, mate. I mean, sounds amazing. And not only that, I'm sure that there'll be plenty of work coming your way. I'm sure just even after this chat, if not into the future.
We really appreciate the time you've taken to talk to me. It's nice, as I said at the start, it's nice to be able to tell your story. Hopefully, I haven't waffled on too much. I do tend to a little bit, but yeah, really nice to meet you face to face and do this. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, mate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that podcast. Please like and subscribe. It helps us reach so many more aspiring engineering professionals and entrepreneurs. You can find us on LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube.